Hey guys, this is Diesel from Imagine Your Goddess playing Professor Diesel today, as by request. I've been asked a lot of questions recently about what we're talking about when we talk about advantage. When we say that something has an advantage of +3 or -1, what does that mean? And so I decided to give you guys a little mock-up, some vocabulary you might need to know, and things to help you understand when we're talking about advantage. Exactly what does advantage mean? Now, for most players that have been around for a while, you guys will know what I'm talking about. I don't need to go into deep detail, but this is for newer players who are trying to get a better understanding of how advantage helps the game. Okay, so if you guys like it, I hope you like and comment and subscribe and let me know what other kind of questions you'd like me to handle for you. But in the meantime, let's just go ahead and get started. What advantage the word itself means is the amount of benefits that you get throughout a turn. And in Vanguard specifically, we have two different kinds of advantage, and I'll talk about that shortly. But in the meantime, let's talk about some vocabulary that you need to know. Plus and minus are two big vocabulary words for what we're talking about. It means exactly what it means mathematically. If you have a plus in advantage, that means that you've gotten an additional card somehow to either in your hand or on the field that help you out. Minuses are the opposite. You've taken away cards from your field or taken away cards from your hand, maybe for an effect or an ability, but regardless, it is an advantage loss. Plus is an advantage gain, minus is an advantage loss. Next words I want to talk about are the words conditional, and specifically the word conditionless. Now you hear this word a lot used by some people in the Vanguard scene, and what a condition means, a conditional effect, is that you have to have a specific thing going on. So for instance, if you know Criff, the Gold Paladin, Blonde Ezel ride, you'll know that that is a very conditional card. You have to have ridden Bowmain as your Vanguard, and you have to have a Criff on the field and a Gareth on the field in order to use the ability. That is a very conditional set of things for an effect. What conditionless is supposed to mean, and you'll often hear it used wrongly, is basically that there is no condition, or there's such little condition that it's practically no condition at all. A good example of this is Scarlet Witch Lulu's ability in Soulless, which I'll go over a little bit later, but it requires you to Soul Blast 2 Oracle Think Tanks from your soul. But if you're playing an Oracle Think Tank deck, you're not using your soul for very much, most likely. So Lulu has no problem getting rid of the 1 and the 2 that you've ridden into in order to use her own ability. Practically conditionless. That makes sense? We talked about plus and minuses. When the plus and minuses are even, we call this a break-even. A break-even just means that there was no gain and no loss over the course of however many advantage claims are done. Finally, I want to talk about the two different types of advantage. There's hand advantage and field advantage. Hand advantage is also referred to as shield advantage. Now, the way this works basically is that if you've gained hand advantage, that means you've gained more cards in your hand. It's called shield advantage because cards in your hand have shield, and you can use that shield to defend yourself against attacks. Field advantage is exactly what it sounds like. You've gained a card onto the rear guard, another card onto the Vanguard, a superior ride, a superior call. Gold Paladins do this a lot. And it increases your field. This is not necessarily considered a loss when you put a card from your hand onto the field, because you lose 1 in hand advantage, but you gain 1 in field advantage. And it's hard to completely distinguish what these terms mean, but in general, we don't consider it a loss of advantage to call from hand. In general. Okay, now that I've gone over that, let's talk about a specific kind of advantage. And I'll be talking about Criff, the Ezel ride, like I mentioned earlier in the video. So just to remind you guys, what Criff does, he's a gold paladin. He's a starter that gets pulled out of the Vanguard circle into the rear when you ride him with a gold paladin. And if you have Bowmain as your Vanguard, and you have a Criff and a Gareth on the field, you can take Criff and Gareth, put them into your soul, and search your deck for a copy of Ezel and ride him. Okay? Now, this seems to be very advantageous, and in a lot of ways it is. It gives you the ability to get a grade 3 on turn 2. You start getting your twin drives earlier, so the potential advantage overall is a little higher. But we're just going to stick with the turn that you can possibly ride into Ezel as quickly as possible. So first we have to talk about the draw for turn. Your draw for turn is always a +1 to your advantage. It gives you a card in your hand that you didn't have before. +1. Okay? And we usually consider riding a -1. That's because technically the card that you're using is only used on the Vanguard circle, so it doesn't add to the number of cards on your field, and it will never be used again. So we often consider it a -1. So when using Criff, you'll draw, and then you'll ride into Bowmains. It's got to be Bowmains because of the conditions on Criff. Okay, so you have a +1 and a -1. That's a break even so far. Then you have to put Criff and Gareth into Soul. Okay, that takes 2 rear guards from your field and puts them into your Soul. You no longer have them on the field. They are no longer in your hand. That is a -2 on your advantage. However, that allows you to go search your deck for a grade 3 and ride it, Ezel. And getting that grade 3 means that you have the ability to twin drive. Okay? Twin drives, overall, we usually put them at +2. There are draw triggers, and draw triggers affect the amount of advantage, but in general, they will always give you 2 cards, therefore is a +2. Okay? So we have +1, -1, +2, -2. The total advantage on the turn that you bring out Ezel using Criff's ability is a +0. That's called a break-even. So that gives you an idea of what we're talking about when we say that something's a break-even or it's giving you no advantage. Okay? So just to talk about calculations in general, drawing for turn is always a +1. Riding is always a -1. Minusing your field or hand for effects is minus the amount that you used. Like in Ezel, we used 2, -2. And then drive checks, it gives you a plus of the amount of checks, +1 more for each draw trigger, because you've drawn another card into hand. Okay? I hope that makes sense. Now, that's just one example of the break-even. I want to talk a little bit about one where you actually gain advantage through the turn. And this is a pretty heavy advantage, so I like to talk about this particular one. What we're talking about is in a Soulless deck. That's an Oracle Think Tank deck using Lulu as your starter and Coco as your main Vanguard. Now, I'll go over the effects of these cards real quick. What Lulu does is she has the ability that when a grade 3 Oracle rides, you can pull her out of Soul into the rear guard. And if you do that, you can take 2 Oracle Think Tanks out of Soul, put them into the discard pile, and draw 1 card. Okay? Coco's ability is that she, if you have 0 cards in Soul, when you place her on Vanguard, you can counterblast 2 to draw up to 2 cards. Okay? So we're talking about turn 3, the earliest that you can ride Coco onto the Lulu setup. So for that turn, you get +1 for your draw and -1 for riding Coco. Same thing as we had before in the Ezel, it's a break-even so far. Then we use Lulu's ability to pull her from Soul. This gives you an advantage of +2. +1 because you get a Lulu onto the field, giving you field advantage and additional rear guard. Then you also get +1 from the hand advantage of drawing 1 card from Lulu's ability. This is considered a practically conditionless ability because Oracle Think Tank decks that use Soulless don't use the Soul, so dropping the cards out of Soul is actually more beneficial for you than not. Okay? Then you use Coco's Counterblast. Now that the Soul is empty, you can Counterblast 2 to draw 2 cards. A lot of people consider Counterblasts to be a condition, but not an advantage loss per se. And in general, I would say that's true. But one of the things you've got to remember about having no advantage loss on that is that once you counterblast cards, they're gone for good. Unless you get a heal trigger or for some reason have damage on flippers, you have a limited amount of resources on your damage zone. So don't necessarily think that these numbers are hard and fast. Okay, so what we've got so far is +1, -1, +2, +2, and then finally a +2 for the twin drive. Okay, in a soulless deck you'll often be using crits, so you probably don't have to worry about hitting any draw triggers, but draw triggers could even add more to the amount of advantage that you're getting for the turn. But the total advantage for this setup, this one turn, is +6, which makes it an amazing advantage creator for your turn. And that's what Oracle Think Tank does in general, is gets you advantage. And in general, the decks that you see a lot, the S-tier decks, Dote and Soulless, other things like that, they generate a lot of advantage for you. Okay? Now, I wanted to talk about one more quick thing about advantage, because I use these terms a lot, and you'll just kind of have to get used to me saying them. Let's say that you've already ridden Coco once, and you've gotten your +6 on that turn. Buku for you. It was great. On your next turn, you have another Coco in your hand, and you decide to ride Coco over Coco in order to get 2 cards. Now, what a lot of people say is that this is an advantage of +1, because you are drawing a card for turn, losing a card to ride Coco, and then you flip Counterblast 2 to draw up the 2 cards. The loss there is considered minimal, but it does count toward your advantage loss. What I would say is that Coco is an advantage of +1.5. Because a Coco sitting in your hand, unless you have a perfect shield, does nothing for your advantage. So your benefit is to lose the Coco to gain the advantage. So that's all I've got for you today, teaching you about the pluses and minuses of advantage. I hope that some of you learned something from this, that when we talk it won't seem so foreign to you. If you have any questions on this topic or other topics, I urge you to comment below. Make sure to use that subscribe button. Like us if you do like us. And as usual, this is Diesel from Imagine Your Goddess, and I will talk to you guys later on.